Thank you very much for joining our interview series. I want to start right away with the first question, Professor Erdogan. How would you characterize the historical evolution of populism and authoritarian politics in Turkey, particularly focusing on key milestones and major factors contributing to their rise?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for this invitation. It will be a pleasure to contribute to your work. First, perhaps we need to make a distinction between authoritarianism and populism when we think about the political history of Turkey. Let's think about populism. Similar to many different cases, we can find early accounts of populism at the beginning of the 20th century. And some intellectuals, a group of intellectuals who are inspired of Narodnik movement. They underlined the importance of people. They were among the founding fathers of the Republic. Perhaps some people can remember famous saying of Kemal Atatürk saying that peasant is the master of the country, something like that. There were two main discussions opening up the country to peasants, etc. They were the high days of corporatism in Turkey. After 1935, Turkey shifted to a strong corporate regime where the people are represented across cooperative groups, such as labor, such as peasants, such as etc. And populism, we can try to translate like that, is one of the 6 important pillars of the Republican People's Party, people. But indeed, RPP was a Jacobin party. It was established by bureaucrats and the military, and they had very strong elitist tendencies. That's why I cannot start the story of populism in Turkey with RPP, but we can say that at the rhetorical level, Republican People's Party was admiring the importance of people, but it wasn't a typical populist party. Then we can think about the rise of Democrat Party after 1946, a political party established by some leading politicians of the RPP, of the single party government. They were focusing on the importance of the peasants, rural areas, etc. They were relatively more populist, and they became more and more populist during 1950s. But they were also elites. This tradition, this rightist tradition, they started as liberals and they ended up as typical rightist conservatives. It has been followed by Justice Party of Süleyman Demirel. Then it has been followed by both Motherland Party in 1980s and True Path Party of 1980 and 90s. All of this rightist part of the spectrum was underlining the importance of the periphery from a typical central periphery distinction, conservative values, peasantry, etc. We can say that all of them, they had a kind of populist tendencies indeed, but many of them, they were not so populist as we know. Real populism became visible with the rise of the AK Party because, of course, there are some scholars linking AK Party to the earlier days of the Democratic Party of 1950, because Democratic Party was representing the values of the periphery, conservatism, religiosity, etc. And AK Party, of course, was a typical conservative party. But indeed, with AK Party, under the leadership of Erdogan, it brought another perspective to populism in Turkey, and it became the textbook case. This is the development of populism in Turkey. To summarize, people became the key point of many different political parties, but populism, as we know, became visible with the rise of our party. What about authoritarianism? Turkey was a for these last 100 years, Turkey was an authoritarian country, especially during the first years of the Republic. We didn't have free and fair elections. We didn't have freedom of speech. We didn't have freedom of press, especially after 1924. In 1930, we had a small experiment of multi-party politics, but not a democracy, a kind of multi-party politics. With 1946, we transitioned to a multi-party politics without changing the constitution. It was something important because, with this constitution, the RPP ruled the country for 20 years. We used the same constitution with a multi-party system. Democrat Party was a kind of reaction towards its authoritarian tendencies, but within the time it became more authoritarian and it created a hostile environment which led to the military coup of 1960. And we had a small period of liberalism, let's say, between 1960 and 1980, but we need to remember that even in 1965, political leaders were complaining about the level of liberalism of the constitution. Süleyman Demirel, the famous leader, said that the constitution is very relaxed for Turkey. And after 1971, we had some changes in the constitution, and the government became less tolerant, especially towards extremist movements. This is something important, especially against extreme left, radical left. In 1980, we had military coup. After 3 years, we transitioned to a democratic rule, but the military was always there under the military supervision. In 1998, we had a kind of postmodern coup, which strictly restricted all kinds of liberties, not only religious liberties or freedom of speech. And during 1990s, because of this rising Kurdish issue, the government and the state were highly intolerant towards the Kurdish movement and separatist movements, and we didn't have freedom of speech. Simply, authoritarian politics is embedded in the genetics of the Turkish Republic. And of course, there's a tension between people who are asking for freedom or who are asking liberalization of the regime. But at the end of each decade, almost, we are facing a reverse reaction. Turkey is becoming more authoritarian than the previous period. There is such a natural tendency towards authoritarianism in this country because of many different reasons.
All right. What is the nature of populism in Turkey? How could you define the major characteristics of populism in the country? Does it belong to only one flank of politics, or is it much more widespread? In what ways have populist and authoritarian tendencies intersected or diverged in Turkey's political landscape over the years? And what have been the implications for governance and societal dynamics?
Let's start the first question, first part of this question. There is no consensus on the definition of populism, as we know. There are different definitions. Our definition is highly based on the existence of a us versus them distinction. If politicians are using that kind of rhetoric, these are the signals of a kind of discrimination or othering, etc. Populist politicians, they are generally using the people as us, and other actors are classified as them. Who are these actors? First, elites, such as bankers, such as industrialists, such as bureaucracy, etc., etc., elites of this country, or judiciary, you can use it, or foreign powers, or some in organizations such as Illuminati, etc., if you want to say, or international organizations, they are all classified as others. Then, at the third stage, leaders, they are presenting themselves as the real representative of the people. Sometimes they are representing themselves as the embodiment of the people. I am the people, not I am. They don't say that I am one from you. They also say that I am you. I am the people. This is something important. And if you look from that perspective, this anti-establishment rhetoric came with, Süleyman Demirel's approach. Demirel was a typical elite. He was graduated from engineering school. He was very successful as a bureaucrat. He had an MA degree in the US. He was the head of an infrastructure agency. Then he participated to politics to replace old democratic leaders after 1960 military intervention. He represented himself as a child of a peasant. And he had this name of Çoban Sülü, Shepherd Sülü. He reinvented him, reconstructed him as a typical peasant who became successful. This is his history. You can say he was very qualified, he could speak English, etc. But if you look at his rhetoric, you can see that he was the real representative of the people against the elite. Who were these elites? First, bureaucrats. Demirel positioned himself against bureaucratic elites, over-westernized, over-modernized. Secondly, he was against judiciary because 1960 Constitution brought out a very independent judiciary. There were a clear separation of powers. The government couldn't control judiciary, and the judiciary was limiting the maneuver of the government. That's why Demirel didn't like it. Demirel also didn't like it. Planning agency, Demirel was against all autonomous agencies, a typical populist reaction. But Demirel wasn't against big business, for example. He was collaborating with big business, and the relationship between Demirel and the military is complex. He was against the military, but he wasn't so reactive. Then after 1970, he realigned his party with the military. It's very complicated, this shift. And there are some scholars working on it. That's why Demirel was using this tone of populism, but he wasn't so convincing as a result of his cooperation with big business and the military. Meanwhile, this traditional, another very prominent person, Necmettin Erbakan, a professor, an engineer, a brilliant person, he positioned himself as a real representative of the people. He was supported by small businesses, religious segments of society who were excluded from the government. He was a typical populist from that perspective. You are underlining the importance of the people. And he was against Western values. He was against capitalist worldview. He was against big businesses. He was against military even. He was criticizing all of them. He was welcomed by many people, and he became very successful. They were two leaders. But for many years, these two leading personalities, they are not replaced by anyone else.
All right. How would you characterize the current regime in Turkey, and what roles do institutions like the military, judiciary, and media play in either moderating or intensifying populist and authoritarian tendencies in the country?
The most important characteristics of this regime are, first, concentration of power. This is something important we need to remember. And the lack of autonomous institutions. First of all, we have a presidential regime, and it's a very strong presidential regime. Generally, the presidential regimes, they are known with their separation of power characteristic, but in Turkey, we don't have separation of power. The president controls the parliament because he's the head of the party, majoritarian party. Meanwhile, the parliament is almost powerless, doesn't have a kind of power to control the government. And the president has a direct control over the judiciary through the government, because the Minister of Justice is very active in this judiciary. And yeah, after 2000, we had some autonomous institutions such as finance regulation institution or other regulation or central bank. All of these autonomous, quote unquote, autonomous institutions, they are under control of the president directly. The parliament is powerless. What about media? Turkish media was always polarized, we know it, because of politicized, polarized media. But now we have still a polarized media, but the one part is very big. One part of this media is being supported by the government, has access to government funds, and owners of these media groups, they are conglomerates. They have some other business relations. They are dependent to the government. Some of them, they are construction companies or that kind of companies. They are dependent to the government. About 2/3 of the Turkish media is dependent on the government. Meanwhile, we have a small part of media. They are also dependent. They don't have access to autonomous income. They are supported by some opposition leaders. If not, they cannot survive. And we don't have any independent and autonomous media outlet. Classical journalism is dead in Turkey. Printed journalism, printed media. And meanwhile, social media also is very polarized. Social media is somewhat more balanced because opposition is relatively more powerful in social media, but it's also polarized. We don't have the middle ground. Moreover, we don't have any autonomous civil society. Civil society was never powerful in Turkey. As I told at the beginning of the interview, Turkey was a corporate state for many years. That's why the state and the government didn't like autonomous civil society organization. The rise of the civil society in Turkey coincides with the 1990s. After 1990s, we had a kind of civil society, but our civil society was always weak. What does it mean? They were dependent to external resources. These external resources could come from the European funds, why not? Or the government. That's why we witnessed the rise of government-organized NGOs, gongos. The bureaucrats were organizing NGOs. Can you imagine? They should be independent. The bourgeoisie in Turkey was always dependent to the state. They are not autonomous. That's why their leading institutions such as TÜSİAD or TOP, they had to align themselves with the state. Once or twice they tried to criticize the state, but at the end of the day, they shift their position. Do you see? There is a huge concentration of power. We don't have separation of powers. The fourth power, media, is polarized and it's under indirect and direct control of the state. And we don't have a strong civil society. We don't have bourgeoisie or anything else who can check, who can control the government or the state. That's why, yeah, there's a very fertile environment for authoritarianism in Turkey. Plus, we need to take into consideration that Turkish political culture is very authoritarian. Turkey is a patriarchal society. We are reproducing this patriarchy every day.
All right. In one of your articles, which analyzes campaign speeches of the Justice and Development Party elites, You emphasize the role of fear in populism, particularly through the construction of us versus them group differentiation. Can you elaborate on how fear is strategically utilized in the AKP discourse to mobilize support and shape voter perceptions?
It's something important because from the earlier days of AK Party, Erdogan used this rhetoric because there are some important collective trauma in the history of Turkish Islamist movement. You can talk about 1924, we can talk about 1930s single party government, but the most recent one was the quote-unquote postmodern coup of 1998. Islamists or political Islamists were at the government, and the military indirectly intervened. They didn't directly intervene, and they had to leave the government. And following this intervention, we witnessed a very repressive political environment against the Islamist movement. It's a huge trauma. And always, these people believe that they won't have access to the power. And whenever they had access to the power, they thought that this power will be taken back by the establishment. They were defining themselves as a political movement against the over-westernized, quote unquote, establishment. This is something important. It was the most important collective trauma. And when we conduct that kind of research, we observed that many conservatives, they were complaining about the practices of this period, even though they didn't witness all these practices. They were complaining about it. They were transferring memories of their fathers or mothers or etc. This is something. Erdogan established his rhetoric on this very basic premise. They were people, they were the real people of the Anatolia, and they were against the establishment. They were representing the people, alienated for a Western or Westernized bureaucracy, etc. The most important issue is that in 2001, we had an important economic crisis, which destroyed the economy, and Erdogan was the representative of the people who suffered of this crisis because he was presenting this crisis as something triggered by bankers or corrupt politicians, bureaucracy. People lost their confidence in political institutions, and Erdogan used it. The parliamentary system was collapsed for 2 years. Then Erdogan was using it. Within time, Erdogan, for example, until 2008, something like that, he always used this rhetoric. We are not at the government. It was his major rhetoric. We are not at the government. We are selected by the people. We are not at the government because the president or constitutional court or judiciary or press, etc., they are limiting our behaviors. They don't allow us to govern. And in 2008, they had this trauma of constitutional court. The party was almost closing down by the constitutional court, but with one vote, to my knowledge, it didn't happen, but they accept it as a threat. Then we had Gezi protest, and Erdogan clearly framed it as an assault towards him. It was just after the military coup of Sisi. That's why he has been able to tell the story. Okay, do you see Western powers and their affiliates in this country and the advocates of the old Turkey, they are advocating us to the people. And he used these events as symbols of threat towards the people of Turkey, which is represented by the president himself. It was the identification, and he used this rhetoric. From his point of view, he's the people. He's not only the representative of the people, he's the people. And who is attacking to this person is also attacking to the people. He always framed in that way. That's why he used this issue of fear, especially after 2015. Yeah, you know, we had a lot of terrorist attacks from ISIS, Daesh, or from the PKK. He said, okay, do you see they are attacking us? Don't allow it. Then he used the same rhetoric in 2017 referendum, in 2019 elections, local elections. Yeah, that time, until the last days of the campaign, he didn't use this rhetoric. It was very surprising. He doesn't prefer to, but yeah, it's a kind of tool. Whenever he wants, he can use this tool. We are under assault of foreign powers and their domestic affiliates, and they are attacking me, meaning that they are attacking you.
All right. Could you provide a prognosis on the potential trajectory of Turkish politics regarding populist and authoritarian tendencies following last year's presidential elections and the recent local elections? Moreover, how do you anticipate future electoral dynamics in Turkey will impact the evolution of populist discourse within Turkish politics?
It's important. It's a presidential system. Yeah, in 1996, to my knowledge, there was an article about the problems of the presidential system. Presidential systems, they are not good to govern such a country, such a diversified country. It's not easy. The issue is that it's a kind of winner takes all system. If you can win presidential elections, you can control everything. It's different than parliamentary system. Meaning that, yeah, if Erdogan or his followers continue to win these elections, they will control the country and their power will increase day by day. They will consolidate their powers. But same system also says that if you win, if the opposition wins, it can change everything. There is such a probability. This is something important. There are some possibility of going to more authoritarian, monistic, etc. region, or there is a probability that it can be changed in one day if opposition can win elections. Last summer, it was popular with 2 percentage points. Opposition missed it. What will happen? Yeah, many of us, we thought that, okay, game is over. What does it mean? Okay, it was the best performance the opposition could present because they've invested on forming coalitions, alliances, developing new constitutions, etc., etc. They invested a lot. They acted as a bloc. They have been successful. Very similar to what happened in Brazil or Poland, etc. There was a kind of coalition of alliance, but they failed. And we thought that, okay, game is over. They cannot form that kind of alliance. But after the local elections, there are some seals of a possibility to reconstruct that kind of coalition, an alliance, not similar to the last one, not an institutional one, but a coalition based on the voters' preferences. That term, we observed it. People, voters, they use strategic voting stuff, and they voted for their second most preferred candidate, or they voted against they voted with negative emotions. They voted against again candidate. That's why in many places, yeah, the opposition had majority with 58, 60, something like that. They were very surprising. There's such a probability. But we have 4 years until next elections, ordinary elections. It is not possible to have earlier elections because of this constitution. It's very difficult. But we can think that, okay, the opposition can be successful, can mobilize the majority of people to vote for their own candidate. They can take this issue into their agenda. That's why we can say that, okay, there is always hope from that perspective. the trajectory can be reversed. There is such a possibility, but we will see.
How would you characterize the local election results held on Sunday in terms of entrenched populism constructed by AKP in Turkey? Can we say that populism has lost some steam after the elections?
Not directly, because AK Party lost its vote, but if you look at the aggregate numbers, you can see that AK Party plus Refah Partisi, New Conservative Party, and MHP National Action Party, they're almost the same votes with the last election. The bloc has the same power still. But meanwhile, what about populism? I don't think that populism lost its appeal. And leading politician of the opposition camp, Imamoglu, has some populist characteristics. That's why he doesn't reject populism. He's not against populist rhetoric or populist ideas. He's trying to present himself as one of the people, representative of the real people. He said that we work as 60 million people. That's the population of Istanbul. You see, we the people, as the people. And he generally defines the situation like that. He's represent the people, and the government is against the people. That's why Imamoglu is using this populist rhetoric. Yeah, there are some different discussions at strategic level. Some people say that when you are dealing with populists, act as populist. If there is a populist at the room, you need to act as a populist. It is not easy to win elections without being populist, because populists, they are always advantageous. They are from that perspective. Another important issue we need to take into account, I'm accepting like that, populism is a kind of feedback mechanism. Populism is related with the failure of classical parliamentary system. Turkey is not a participatory democracy. Turkey has never been a participatory democracy, even under the best days of the parliamentary system. The parliament was under control of the party leaders. Party leaders, they were controlling everything. They were appointing members of the parliament, etc., etc. It is a kind of very alienated system. And the rise of populism was against this system. And if you don't replace this old dead system with a better one, you cannot win. From that perspective, I don't agree at all. Current presidential system is closer to the people than the previous parliamentary system. Everyone can agree on it. I don't agree at all. It seems closer. That's why people are advocating this presidential system, because we are electing the president in 2 rounds system. In a parliamentary system, you cannot elect the prime minister. It is not possible to elect. In Israel, it's possible to directly elect the prime minister, but in Turkish system, it is impossible. It's very complicated. People are and were alienated from politics. And populism is a way of rebuilding this link to attract attention of the people to politics. There's huge alienation. That's why, from a normative perspective, we need populism. Populism has a lot of negative consequences, but as Margaret Canavan advocated, we need populism to improve the system. It's a kind of feedback. It's not something humiliating. That's why we need populism. I personally think that if the opposition wants to be successful in the forthcoming elections, they have to be good populists.
All right. Lastly, Professor Erdogan, do you agree with CHP Mayor Ekrem Imamoglu's prognosis that local election results will signal an end to authoritarianism, not only in Turkey, but also globally?
Not sure. if we will have too many elections. We will have European Parliament elections, and we will have several elections, and we will have American elections. And my expectation is that radical populist right will be very successful at the EP election. This is my expectation. And there's a probability that Trump will be the next president of the US. There is no reason for that kind of change. Yeah, we are living in a era of full crisis where there are too many crises: economic crisis, political crisis, where immigration issue, we have inflation, we have war in Ukraine, Gaza, etc. The life is not very comfortable, and these uncertain times are very good for populists, because populists are very good in manipulating people's feelings, people's reactions towards these uncertainties. That's why I don't see any objective reason for that kind of non-populist comeback.
Professor Erdogan, thank you so very much. Appreciate
You're
it.
welcome. You're welcome. Have a nice day.
You too. Bye-bye.